in. So Jamie studied. Was a student at Ulster University. Did a marketing degree. Got a first class honours degree there. Graduated in 2020. And is now working as a marketing executive with The Tactics here in Belfast. I hope I said that right. So Jamie's got quite an interesting placement experience, placement internship experience, which we'll obviously talk to him about as we go. Next guest on my right here, we've got Sophie Kennedy, and Sophie is a final year student currently who's just finished her placement. And she's also an Ulster University student on the Communications, Advertising and Marketing degree. Again, Sophie's got a very interesting story to tell about her placement and other experiences, let's say, she's had during her studies. And in a bizarre coincidence, which we found out when we met each other, I got in contact with Sophie after I saw a post on LinkedIn, I think it was, about your internship finishing.
Yeah, that's right.
And then when we met to have a chat about coming on to this episode, it turns out that we went to the same primary school and big school, obviously at very different times, which is pretty obvious to anyone who can see us both now. So thanks very much, guys, for coming along. The timing of this stream isn't an accident. There are people coming back into their studies now in second year, and I'm just back from Ulster University doing a thing up at Coleraine this afternoon, and the talk very much from the lecturers and the careers and employability people is, okay, start thinking now about your placement opportunities for next year. So we deliberately timed this around this time to hopefully give people a little bit of guidance as to the opportunities that they can, how they go about finding the right opportunity, and then what the experience is like. So can we start off? Can you tell us a little bit about, without going into too much detail at the minute, but just give us a little bit of an outline, if we start with you, Sophie, about who your internship was with and what was the role you were doing?
Yeah. So my internship was with ESPN UK, and as I began that, I was working as a direct-to-consumer intern, which was working on the over-the-top platform ESPN Player, a streaming service, basically.
Okay. And Jamie, if you want to tell us about the placement roles that you had?
Yes, so I started off my placement with Sync NI and also with Wellington Professional Recruitment. It was two businesses, but Sync, they were owned by the same person. So we got to work across those two. And then I moved to a digital marketing agency based in Belfast called Glaze Digital.
Okay.
So I did that.
Okay. Trying to go back then to that period in October, whenever you come back after first year and the party's over and people are saying, now you have to start thinking seriously about this stuff. Was the internship in your mind before the second year started, or what did you think about the whole idea of the internship?
Yeah, I think the communication, advertising and marketing course, I think they do really well in highlighting that sandwich year that you take, as part of the course. I think for me it was definitely on my mind in between first and second year when I took a year out. And so because I took that year out, I knew the year above me were all in that process of searching and trying to find the right internship for them. And so when when the time came for me to join second year and to start thinking about that, it was just totally on my mind from the start. And it was like trying to get as organised as I could from the get-go.
Okay.
Yeah, and for me, I actually had a family friend that did the course before I did it, so I always had that insight of what was to come. And she had obviously done a placement year, and she'd really enjoyed it, so I always knew that was part of it. And also throughout the whole course, there was that employability element. Yeah. So it was always like, you're doing these modules and you're learning these skills, but then applying them seemed like the obvious next step. So the course was kind of built for that. So when the time it came to placement year, it made sense to do one that was hands-on and was going to be able to allow you to put the theory into practice.
Okay. And I mean, there are lots of marketing roles out there. So, whenever you're told, okay, go find your marketing role for your placement, I mean, where did you start? What were the first things that you did?
Yeah, I mean, it's so daunting, I think, to begin with, because you know how many opportunities there are and you want to get a good one that kind of fits your profile as a student and your strengths and weaknesses. For the communication, advertising and marketing course, and I would probably say the CMPR course, the communication management and public relations course. I think both sets of classes are very lucky that we have Conor McGrath, our placement coordinator, and he was absolutely incredible in sending through, you know, reams upon reams of emails every single day to ensure that you have a selection to choose from. And then, you know, if you're interested enough in finding a good placement, I think you allocate some time to researching yourself as well, what's out there.
Okay, what about you, Jamie?
Yeah, so we had Kathy Moore that was also there, and Glenda Martin. So we had a lot of talks surrounding, you know, what the opportunities were. But we also had employers come into the university and give talks, and that's actually how I got into Sync and I, because that was that they came along, and that's how I got into that. I think that, you know, when you're starting off that search, I think it's good to talk to those like people that within the employability department, because they'll be able to advise you, you know, what areas would be best to go down, and also they're going to be able to give you advice with your CV.
I'd imagine it's pretty daunting whenever you know somebody says go get yourself a placement next year. I mean, I never did one, and I mean it's an ongoing regret that it wasn't part of the degree that I did, because I do think there's an opportunity missed there, and I know from my working life afterwards that just I think the caliber or the commercial awareness, I think, or the experience that people get during that year out really stands them in good stead whenever it comes to getting a job. I mean, did either of you have an idea of the kind of role or the kind of organization that you wanted to go into, or was it really a case of let's just look around what's out there and try and pick something that we think fits?
Yeah, I suppose it was a mix, kind of. It was a mix of everything for me. At that time, I was a social media intern for Netball Northern Ireland, and that's, you know, the national governing body for netball. At the time, I was also coaching basketball and kind of heavily involved in different sport organisations. So for me, looking for something that might have incorporated those things was definitely a huge plus. But at the same time, I was very open to looking for, you know, just the roles that I knew would offer me good opportunities to kind of upskill. And I knew that all the skills that I'd got from those, like, you know, sports background kind of roles would be transferable into the ones that maybe weren't as traditionally sporty.
I mean, that leads us on to a point that I mentioned to you that I wanted to go down a little bit more. So your university experience had almost another year out.
Yeah.
Before your placement or internship year. Do you want to tell us about what that was and where that opportunity came from?
Absolutely. So when I finished my first year of communication, advertising and marketing, like, absolutely loved the course and had an amazing first year. I thought the lectures were amazing, and just the steer towards developing yourself as a professional in your industry is huge, and I loved that. I think one thing I did notice was, you know, some of the students that might have been maybe a year or two older, just the experience that they had, and not even, you know, professional experience, I suppose just life experience as well. And before I embarked on my university journey, I had seen this opportunity with a basketball club that I knew over in Norway. And so when I got to the end of my first year at university, I thought I'd reach out to them and see if I could apply for the role that was available before uni. But I was so scared of uni, you know, disappearing if I didn't take my UCAS acceptance form and everything. So I reached out to the Norwegian Basketball Club and was lucky to receive funding from Erasmus. At the time, I think it was called the European Voluntary Service. And so I completed a 10-month service there over in a place called Nesodden, which was a 20-minute ferry from Oslo. And basically I just helped to coach more or less all of the age groups over in Norway, and helped to develop the club. Got to coach in some regional academies as well, which was incredible, you know, as a coach, to try and hone in on and get better. But I mean, the life skills I took from that, and just, you know, communicating with people from different cultures was just unbelievable. And it definitely motivated me when I came back to second year and, you know, began looking for the placement experience.
I mean, you hear people say quite a lot, you know, that those opportunities to travel definitely do sort of broaden your horizons and widen the angle of view, if you like. I mean, it sounds like that was something that definitely played out with your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And the umbrella organisation, Erasmus, that ran that year for me, there were so many other young people from like Germany, Switzerland, Austria that were in Norway that year, and so having weekends where you'd all come together and partake in seminars was amazing too, because you were getting to just talk to people that you wouldn't have got to otherwise, and it definitely opens up your perspective compared to, you know, Belfast. It's great to get out there and chat to a few more people.
Was it cold?
Oh, absolutely. Freezing. Went over without not much of a winter coat, I suppose, you know, just maybe a small puffer jacket, and came back with so many different layers and winter boots and everything, because, yeah, it was freezing.
And I mean, I'm sure Oslo, I mean, I've been in Oslo airport once, but I've never spent any time there. So, I mean, what's Norway like?
Yeah, I mean, it was so strange because I knew the basketball club already for me. So in that sense, I felt like I had a home there, and I knew a few people, which was very reassuring. At the time, I was 19, so to move over there completely and, you know, have a little apartment by yourself in a new town or city was totally daunting, but everyone was so welcoming, and I think that was the one thing that always struck me. I could always go back, and I still am in close contact with a lot of them, and it's always the same thing, like, oh, come and visit whenever, so hospitable, and always so welcoming with everything. And to be taken in as like a member of their club and to have that experience with them was so amazing.
Okay. And what about you then, Jamie, when we go back to, you know, having that idea of the kind of role or the kind of opportunities that you took a slightly different approach, if you like, and, you know, with where you had the two different placements. And I think we talked about this in the last episode a little bit, but was that a deliberate decision to try and get a mix of experience?
No, so when I started off like looking for a placement, I was very open to see what was around. And, you know, when I got to Sync and I and was able to work, you know, in a tech magazine and be able to be taking part in editorials and be able to almost really reach out into that network of the Belfast tech scene, which is growing and huge. So I loved that, and then I really enjoyed the fact that I could dip into that, and then the recruitment side of things, which was a completely different side of it altogether. It was like seeing two sides of the business, you know, working with, you know, tech companies, also seeing how they recruited, completely with a circle approach, and then moving to the, you know, to Glaze, I was then getting that agency experience. So that's the way I did that year, you know. Looking back, I just learned a lot about and tried a lot of different areas, and I also in that year did quite a lot of public speaking, which was amazing. Looking back, I just had the most incredible year. Plus, you know, I remember speaking at Disrupt HR and being like, how am I doing this class? And stuff like that. It pushed me, it made me mature a lot professionally. I think I was able to see, gain that experience of finding a voice and an opinion on stuff, and also, you know, the editorial side of things. You know, I was getting the opportunity to speak with, interview, see exact tech companies that come out of, and that's where I've ended up, you know, in a scale up. So it's kind of led me to that point, and, you know,
see, this is the interesting, a big interesting part of this for me. And I mean, there's no big scientific research in this, and I don't have any evidence to back this up. But for me, I don't think people realize how often the experience they have on their internship can influence where they end up for a large part of their career. And that might be either the industry they go in, or the kind of role that they end up doing, or the sector that they work in. Because I mean, like you said, you've ended up working in a tech company, and your sport has been a part of your life for a long time. So, you know, the basketball and then the ESPN, and, you know, is it somewhere where you see yourself going, because it's an industry that you enjoy being in?
Yeah, I mean, at times, yeah, I would absolutely love to, you know, stay in that industry, but I'm always so cautious of maybe shooting myself in the foot with that, and making sure that I'm open to getting more experience in different areas that maybe one day I could bring back to that industry. But I think I mean, for now, I think my mind is open, but it would be incredible to stay within that industry and to keep going. Yeah.
Okay. Going back to sort of the practicalities of the getting the role, can we start with you, Jamie, on this one? Can you tell us what the application process looked like and when it was that you secured the role with Sync NI then?
Yeah, so I think a part of the advice I would give with that is be brave when it comes to, you know, reach out to employers, that, particular employers thinking, they came into the university, said email. I emailed before I was out of the room. Do you know that way? I sent the email before I'd even left.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I've kind of led a lot of my career so far. And I think that, there's a lot to be said about having that initiative. And I think that there's something to be said as well about thinking about what you can offer an organization. I remember sitting there in that room at that time thinking, well, I have a real natural interest in tech. I have a real natural interest in, that scene. The role sounded like it was undefined. It was like, brilliant, I can really make a stamp there. And that's how I went about it. So I'd say, like, when it comes to applications, seek advice in terms of making sure you have all the, all the information that you need. But I wouldn't be shy about reaching out. And also, you can do that on LinkedIn as well. Like, create like a presence for yourself. So when that employer looks you up, you're in their mind because you've made that mark.
Is there something in that as well, though, about being self-aware enough to know that the kind of environment you're gonna flourish in? Yeah. So for some people, being given carte blanche almost and said, listen, you can come in here. We haven't got anyone in this role at the minute. We want new ideas. We want you to shape it. While that is right up your street and you're really enthusiastic about it, you can understand how, for others, that would be utterly terrifying. And others might want to go into a situation where, I, as part of my internship, I want to go in and be part of a team and see how the team interacts with each other and see the different jobs that people do. So do you think your natural personality, or you need to take that into account and understand the kind of environment you want to go in?
I think there's a confidence element. I think a lot of the time you can have that feeling of, oh, will I, won't I? Why not? Mm-hmm. Go for it. And, especially when you're going on to an internship, you're there to learn. Yes. You will be there and you will be given the opportunities to learn, and you're not expected to be the finished product by any stretch. So almost enjoy, if I give any advice, it'd be like, enjoy that time. Yeah. You are there to learn. So try everything and go for it, and to find out what you like, what you don't like, things you don't like. Work harder at them, like go for it, like why not? You've no reason not to. So I would say just have that confidence with that. Sometimes I can hold you back, and I remember like at that time thinking, what do I, how do I go about it? Don't need to overthink it, just go for it.
And what about you then? I mean, you mentioned Conor McGrath, and do you find that having someone like that who was so engaged in trying to help the students get the internships really make it a lot easier?
I think it definitely does, like especially in terms of shining light on opportunities you mightn't have seen otherwise. I'm not sure if I would have came across the ESPN ones if I hadn't have, just allocated time each day to looking through the emails he was sending and to make sure that I had an eye over all of them. I think it depends on how much you probably want a placement as well. I think sometimes you kind of get so sidetracked by maybe your coursework or work that you have due, or maybe a part-time job, that you forget placement is always there in the background. And I think in that sense, my advice would always have been like start early, because once you have that out of the way, and even just having small bits and pieces like your CV kind of up to scratch so that you can just apply to something if it comes up, then you're good to go.
Okay, and what about the application process? I mean, when did you become aware of that role, and then when did you know you had it in the bank, if you like?
Okay, so on I remember the day that I actually found the role that I was applying for ESPN, the direct-to-consumer role. I think it must have been a Friday, and I just kind of like glanced over it, and it's what you mentioned about the confidence piece, Jimmy. Like, I was not applying for that. I was like, oh my goodness, that sounds absolutely incredible. But I didn't realize either that it was at the time owned by the Walt Disney Company, and there were so many things, and I knew how competitive that application process was. So I remember seeing it initially and thinking, okay, we'll maybe come back to that. Then I realized, I think that the deadline was the 2 days later on the Sunday. And so I just remember on the Sunday just setting myself down and just making sure that I had already, just applied, answered all the questions as best I could. And then I think it must have been January time, so that was the end of December, and obviously Christmas break, everything kind of slows down over that period, and then it must have been early January that I got a call from my manager, my line manager on placement, Ollie, who then said that they'd like to invite me over to an interview in London, and then That was actually just before everything shut down, more or less, for COVID. So yeah, it was quite a quick transition, I think, in the end, which I wasn't expecting, but I was also so glad for it to be quick because it takes the stress.
Does it take a lot of the pressure off?
Yeah.
If you're sitting there in January with an offer for an internship starting in the summer, you know, it clears the desk, if you like, in terms of you can now focus on the academic stuff for the rest of the year, knowing that you've got that sorted, rather than it being this thing that's hanging over you because it just keeps getting moved to tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow.
Yeah, and it was 100% one less thing to worry about. I think throughout the year, when you begin uni again in October time, it's in your head that whole time. It's constantly like, just, I don't know, for me anyways, I think I'm a real worrier in that sense. Like, I will think about it constantly until it's done. So having it out of the way and just knowing that I could take a seat back and just breathe was good.
Okay. I mean, you've touched on it a little bit there already, but in terms of Conor, and you've all mentioned people at the universities who were great help, but I mean, going back to what you said, Jamie, how useful was the opportunity to hear from employers when they came into the university and get a look under the skin, if you like, of what the organisations were like?
Yeah, I mean, it was so useful because you were able to get like passionate about it because you could see that people that came in were, and I think as well it gave you a natural introduction. And if it was, you know, for example, with me, you know, those were very small companies, Sync and Glaze were very small, so the recruitment process was very different to perhaps yours, where it was a more formalised application. It was very different in that sense. But for a small company, and even, you know, particularly a small company, it gave you a window of what it was like. And, it, you know, I emailed quite quickly.
When did you have the placement confirmed then?
It would have been like February.
Oh, okay, so still very early.
Still very early.
Do you think that would be a surprise to people if they knew that, you know, you haven't really got until May or June here? You've got, you know, you really need to have your ducks in a row by Christmas in terms of understanding what opportunities are there, because organisations have to plan for this, whoever this person coming in is. So they've got to go through, follow due process to make sure everything comes in that way. So. Yeah,
I mean, I think it depends on the organisations that are out there as well. I know some of them don't actually release placements until maybe January or February time, and then so that delays the overall application process for those applicants maybe. And I think even like American companies were released as late as like April, March time, you know. So I do think it depends on the organisation and, you know, what they're hoping, what their kind of line is or schedule is, sorry.
I would also say like a good thing to do would be to try and reach out to somebody that is a year above you in university, like build those relationships because they'll be able to advise you with time frame and they'll be able to give you a picture of what their placement's like. Potentially you could go there. Also utilize the resources within the uni, like especially like CV clinics and just discussing what exactly is needed and have an eye over it. And especially now with like a lot of video applications and stuff people are doing, you sometimes need that, like, to be really creative about it. Get a group together, group of your friends together. You can help each other out to pull that resource together. But I would definitely say use that resource early. Get in to find out about CV and even look at a range of roles. See what they actually have to offer. But also don't be afraid by a small big company, because if you really want to get something out of the placement, you'll be able to you know put your stamp on it and gain those skills wherever you go, no matter how big or small it is. So keep open-minded.
What was the thing about either the presentation that Sync and I did when they came in, or what you'd learned about them, that made you think that's a place that I wouldn't mind being in?
Yeah, well, I remember like not knowing anything about what the office was like or the accommodation or like anything to do with that. It was just based off the fact that it came at a time, I think, where I was just in that headspace anyway. I think you reached that point in that year in particular where you're like, I'm just ready. And it was a few we'd had that day. It'd been like weeks of a couple, so you knew that was coming. And I think the whole get in touch really suited me. I was like, all right, I will. Like I was very happy just to go for it. But it was also, I think, the fact that it was going to be, as you said earlier, it was going to be a blank slate and there was going to be the chance to do a lot of things. And I think I really liked the tech scene. I just really had it in me to want to get into writing and copywriting and journalism, and I really enjoyed being able to bridge that gap. and I really then enjoyed being able to go into an organisation that I went there like a week later, and I knew that it was a good place to be. So I was able to gauge quite quickly. So it was a quick process, really.
Okay, and I mean, I assume it was the sport connection was the initial attraction for you.
Yeah, I think so.
On the ESPN side, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the title direct to consumer intrigued me completely because it was kind of a growing scene. I know there's Netflix and you've got, you know, like ESPN Plus. So I think the thought of working in something like that was growing and a growing space and still is, it's become even bigger over the pandemic, just intrigued me, and it was something that I thought, you know, it's something different and I could challenge myself in, and I definitely learned something new.
Okay. And I suppose, I mean, going back to your, I mean, I assume the original plan with yours was that you were going to be, was it over in England somewhere?
Yeah. So I would have been based in London, had everything went to plan, but I was lucky enough that the role still went ahead, and I ended up working remotely from Belfast, which was still amazing because the experience, you know, I still wouldn't have got if I had if it had just been cancelled completely, and to still
I mean, you know, you hear people saying, oh, you know, people have missed out because of the COVID pandemic and all. I mean, do you have any sense that you missed out on anything as a result of the way it was done?
I don't think so. I mean, I think for me, sometimes I felt the physical distance in terms of, you know, wanting to be a bit closer to your team. I would have loved to have interacted with them on a one-to-one basis more, but the team that I was with, the direct-to-consumer team and just the wider commercial team at ESPN, everyone was incredible. There were so many different team calls each day that everyone would be on, and I think everyone was very thorough in having, you know, one-to-ones if you needed to air something out, and just understanding in general that it was a different dynamic. You can't just ask a question and get it answered in like 15 seconds. It will be a slightly bit longer. And I think that actually matured me most professionally, having that remote experience, because it wasn't something I was used to before. I think having everything in person would have been very comfortable. So I think in the end, I definitely got more out of it in that sense.
Okay. I suppose for an organisation like ESPN, the whole idea of hybrid or remote is probably something they were used to anyway, with teams all over the place. So you know, video conferencing and tape, you know, calls with people in different locations is probably something they were quite familiar with anyway. So it wasn't a massive leap.
Yeah.
But do you think there's something in I mean, you talked to me briefly when we spoke last week about how structured and organised they were in terms of what the placement was, and even how your replacement sort of comes in and there's a little bit of crossover so that there's a proper handover process and things.
Yeah.
Do you find it probably the size of the organisation means they know how to run things like that a lot better? Yeah,
I think I mean, it was definitely still an evolving role at times because of the nature of working remotely. I know that previously another like manager on my team, he had an intern himself, but then he didn't get one the year that I was an intern, and so at times I would help him out with bits and pieces too. And so as the year went on, then my role kind of evolved, and it just also evolved to what my strengths and weaknesses were too. And then when it came to my replacement, we more or less had a week, and anytime he was free, he'd just jump on a call with me, and as I did my day-to-day roles, I would just walk him through those. And it's just having that I think touch point with me was so important for him to then get to grips of working remotely, and just to even get used to the team dynamics and, you know, how everything was running, I think was really useful.
And you know, people might assume, you know, you're going for a placement with ESPN, it's a massive organisation. I mean, you were working actually as part of a quite a small team within ESPN, weren't you? Yeah,
that's right. So the direct-to-consumer team, which was the team that was kind of operating ESPN Player, was made up of the direct-to-consumer head, my line manager, who was like the senior executive, and then my other manager, I suppose, who was like the marketing manager. And there was the four of us, you know, obviously including myself, and it would have mainly been, I suppose, my line manager and myself running the app each day and making sure that the service was going smoothly. And my manager would have had to, you know, schedule everything. Ollie, he would have had to make sure that, you know, all the timing was right, because the time zone difference as well compared to America. The service offered a lot of US college sport, so it definitely was a slim team running quite a big operation.
Sounds
and
like it was busy.
yeah, definitely busy, but I mean, complete credit to the team because they were all phenomenal, and even having the time just to guide me and ensure that I was still developing professionally. I definitely couldn't thank them enough.
Okay. Sticking with you for a second, Sophie. I mean, I can imagine. I mean, you know, I know, that experience of your first day on a new job can be pretty terrifying. You know, the idea, because you're walking into the unknown. Essentially, you've been part of a sales process up to that point. You know, and you've bought what they're selling, and they've bought what you're selling, and it's all fine. But there's always that, you know, is this going to be what I think it's going to be? I'd imagine the trepidation there may have been a little bit worse because it was remote, and it was the lack of you know, being able to stare into the whites of somebody's eyes, for want of a better word. Can you remember sort of the first, as you approached the first minute of your placement role?
Yeah, I think I got to the stage where, because of COVID, I was just happy for it to still be going ahead. And so I remember, like, I was sitting, you know, at my laptop ready to go on my first day, waiting for the first Disney kind of induction. And I think the first few days are kind of, there's such a series of formalities where you're just on a big, massive Zoom call with a load of other interns. It kind of calms your nerves, and you're almost like excited and relieved to start interacting with your line manager to get kind of stuck in, because up until that point it's just, you know, you're ticking boxes, making sure like all of the precautions and everything is covered, but then not being able to interact in terms of, you know, just gauging like from people's mannerisms and different things, and having to do it from Zoom. I think even just having to slow myself down, my Belfast accent on Zoom, whereas maybe in person it would be slightly different. It was things like that were probably most, you know, daunting, I suppose, at the start.
But the structured sort of induction process helps.
It was, it kind of, I think it definitely was what I expected, if that makes sense. And then it was more so as I got to grips with my role, that was when like the real learning started, and whether it was meeting my expectations or whether I felt like I could get better at certain areas was when I was able to, I suppose, contrast and evaluate from my application, like, oh, is this what I thought it would be? And I mean, it definitely was, yeah.
I mean, in terms of you, Jamie, I mean, did you walk into sync and go, right, lads, this is how this is going to work?
No, I didn't. I remember the first few days being really interesting, because the nature of that business was there's lots of different organizations and other companies coming in all the time. So I think quite one of the really good benefits was there was a lot of like stakeholder engagement from the beginning. And I do remember it being as the first, they didn't have this particular role before, so it was very much a learning curve for them as well. But I remember just little things like in meetings and stuff, and being face to face with people not necessarily knowing, you know, different things, like just professional conduct takes time, like to know how to be and to know how to you know, how to express different ideas.
Have I never done it? I don't know, but I mean, is there that sense of, you know, whenever you're sitting in that meeting and there's senior people about and they're talking, is there that sense of you're thinking, I don't know if I belong here?
Do you know, there was less of that because the company was so small.
Okay.
So there was less of that, but I remember that, you know, with things like, you know, writing pieces and trying to get, you know, to that. So I had a really good mentor in Tina, who you might remember Tina from Sync. She was very, very meticulous writer. She was really, really good. But I remember, like, I learned so much from her because of her background in that. So I definitely felt like that with her at points, because I was like, oh gosh, she is amazing at this, and she'd been a reporter herself. So I think that, but also the breadth of responsibilities. I remember, like, there was an event organised that went on, and you would have to turn up at events and kind of, you know, if we were live tweeting at something or we were like involved with a different organisation. I remember going to like a lunch at Tysus. Do you remember that? And I remember being there, like, you did have to jump up quite quickly, but that was the nature of that business, you know, going into sitting in meetings and looking back.
Is there an element of it? You just have to be comfortable being uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah,
Definitely.
And it got to that point, I remember at uni as well, you know, when it was coming to that stage, and everybody was pushing themselves, you know, to go to this different place, whether they were applying away or whether they were applying here. So it got to that point where you were already thinking along the lines of, you need to really up the game, and you did feel like you had to grow up quite quickly, and that you went from in class, I think it was like a week or something I had.
I mean, you were not in there, so when we said about the comfortable being uncomfortable piece, I'm sure there, it can be quite. I mean, because I'd imagine there's quite a lot of technical stuff going on in a streaming sports app that's streaming college sports events from the US to an audience here in the UK and Europe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me mainly maybe it was recording and presenting data that the app was maybe like viewership. That those were the analytics that the app would have used. In terms of streaming, I think that was dealt with by like a content team, somewhere maybe in the US, and we just had to kind of make sure things were going smoothly. But for me, I think my role, there was a lot of commercial awareness that was needed, and it was something that I hadn't really experienced in my modules previously, and I felt like it was definitely probably my weakest area when I got into placement. And so throughout the year it was constantly checking in and trying to hone in on that, because we had to be able to tell stories to the rest of the ESPN team about what was happening for certain maybe ESPN documentaries and why, and just having that awareness was really useful in the end.
It leads me right on to the next question actually, which was what did the experience teach you about the world of work that you didn't know before you went in?
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And I mean, like the commercial awareness piece is one piece.
It was huge for me. Yeah. And any of my placement, I suppose, not visits, but calls with Connor, that was what he was saying as well, that a lot of the time we don't have that commercial awareness. So even just presenting on Zoom, I think being able to attribute certain anomalies, if that's the right word, in viewership patterns to other sporting events that were happening around the world that maybe had a domino effect, and was why our viewership was in particular quite low that day, was amazing. But it was something that my mind wasn't necessarily tuned in that way of thinking, and so having those prompts from my manager and even the head of direct to consumer to look into those and begin to explore why those things are happening.
Do you think that's something to do with the fact that, now there are consequences, whereas, when you're studying the theory is great and provides you with a really good solid foundation, but whenever you're going into a business and, you're essentially trying to turn the product you're selling into cash, there are consequences if it doesn't work. So the level of critical thinking and analysis that you have to go into about analysing why it didn't work, and it's not about hanging people out to dry or finding where a fault was. It's understanding, and it needs a good culture for this to work. But understanding what's happening here that is making that thing happen over there. Yeah. Does it make you think more about what's happening in the external environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've noticed I'm currently working along in another role now with my basketball organisation, and we're currently launching a podcast. And so the research that's going into the launch strategy of that, just being able to look at different consumption habits and how they've changed as a result of maybe the pandemic or things becoming back to normal, I suppose, as well. Everything has like a reason to it, and then I suppose it's looking towards the planning stage of what can we do to ensure maybe it doesn't happen again, or what can we do to engage the audience. So it definitely was so exciting, and I noticed myself taking it into my uni work now and then different roles that I'm now in.
And then for you, Jamie, I mean, it's sort of the same question. What did you learn in both of the placements that you had about what the requirements of working in a commercial role would be?
Yeah, I think there was it was twofold, because in the first placement, you were working for an organisation, you were in-house, so there was that focus on, the brand and being part of that. But when I moved across to the agency and you were working on lots of different client accounts, and it was a completely different experience, because then you were working not only on different accounts but different industries, so you could be working on baby wipe company, you could be working on a dog food. So it really, really varied like that. I would say that one of the main things I learned was that agility piece to change. I think, like, especially when you're a student and you've gone through, everything just kind of goes, you go from one module to the next. And then when you get into the workplace, jobs, people leave job. I remember, like, in the first place, and somebody left for a new role, and I remember being like, this was just quite jarring to me, because I just
You thought people stayed forever?
just like things like, people leave, then you move on, and new people join, and just the whole dynamic and how that shifts. And those working relationships are very important. And I think working in a team is something that is, especially when you're at uni and you're quite competitive. Our course could be quite competitive, so it was like you shouldn't realise that sometimes when you're in a team, it's team effort. It's not always. So it's a very different, that shift of thinking and learning to be a good team player.
I've gone through the graduate roles, various different roles. I ended up managing people, and I remember being utterly terrified the first time I had to manage people, because nobody ever teaches you how to do this. This is the thing that you get promoted to. Somebody said to me once, you work hard at school, you go and get a job, you get promoted to a job that you can't do, and then that's where you stay. But I remember when I first got the job of managing people, it was utterly terrifying, because you're like, no one's ever told me how this is supposed to be done properly. And of course, because the answer is there is no proper way to do it. If you're looking for a formula for managing people, I'm afraid that the person who invented that would be a very rich person. Do you find that it is that being in that sort of team dynamic is and having different plates spinning, like you mentioned, because there's a modularity to study, because you're doing one thing and now you're doing the next thing and now you're doing the next thing. Whereas when you go into a place, it's like, okay, we've got 15 plates spinning here and we can't afford for any of them to smash. So you've got to make sure that all those plates keep spinning. Is that a bit of a shock?
Yeah, it is. And I think as well, I remember it on the first placement, I was in the role 4 months, I think, and then another student from my class came and joined and it fulfilled another function. But so it was like, I remember explaining to her like what we were doing and everything. So it was kind of like, it's funny how things change so quickly like that. So even that was a massive learning curve, but I do think that there's that element of you just have to, especially in a small company, you just have to try lots of different things. You don't know what you could be asked to do. You don't know what, the role varies a lot. Perfect for placement, because you're used to that sort of way of thinking. But then I think that you gradually then resilient. You just are then able to cope with more. You notice these things when you come back to uni, and then you approach assignments like very differently.
Yeah, that's interesting. We'll move on to that. I wonder if you can hold on to that thought, because one of the things I wanted to talk to you about then was, how, for you, just with it being the most recent experience, how has your experience on the internship influenced how you'll approach your final year? Have you noticed that you're approaching things differently now since you went back?
Yeah, I feel like I'm just so ready to, I'm currently working on an assignment, and I'm just in that stage where I'm like, okay, I have, as soon as we got it was like, okay, plan, and then bit by bit you're just working at it and trying to, I think there's more of a strategic approach to it. You're trying to see what you can do better, and I think that you're also going at it from a different angle, because you're using your experience and what you've learned, even just commercially, and then trying to put a spin on it in your assignment to make it that little bit more interesting. So I've definitely noticed that, yeah.
Okay. And what about you, Jim? I mean, you touched on it there before I interrupted you and hold on to the idea. So you mentioned that it changed your approach. How did that manifest itself?
So we had a lot of group work in final year. So then you were, and we also, so as well as having group work, we were working on a lot of client projects as well, like company projects. So I think the approach naturally changed in uni, because we were going from working on more theoretical things to, companies were coming in and you were having to come up with the brief. You were have to come up with a strategy from scratch. And I think when you were at that in final year and it was all to play for, and you knew the final, and every mark was counted. I knew every mark on that course. Like, I knew what I needed for the different things. I remember, like, you got to that stage, especially in second semester, where you were really aware of that. I think just role delegation, somebody fell into this part, and that was very different. Whereas before it was like all mock in.
Okay, so is that a little bit of the learning that comes from the internship then, that you sort of realise where in those sort of team environments, what your best position is, for want of a better word?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we haven't experienced any group work yet as such, maybe some class discussions in breakout rooms. And I think there's definitely maybe a further level of trust among your peers because you know they've went out and experienced maybe not, you know, an exact replica to what you've experienced, but they have that similar knowledge and level of like professionalism that you can all bring to a coursework piece, or maybe if it's just a conversation that you're having in a tutorial. So I definitely noticed that everyone's very engaged and everyone's also applying the theory that we're learning in class straight to the tutorials and having that open dialogue, which is really interesting. Yeah.
I actually remember, like, practical example in Fanny, we were doing a project for a particular company and we were doing this digital marketing strategy, but we were a team of 4. One had Google Ads experience on placement. So we'd built out a whole part on that, but they were able to take that bit. Another person had like a lot of video marketing experience. They were able to take that bit. Then another person had a social media plans. So another person did that. And then we had like, you know, the person that was able to piece it all together, you know, the copywriter, the writer came under that. So you found that you were almost able to take that. But that's where it is when you go into the workplace. Yeah. Everybody's a different role and you know exactly. I think there was an expectation. You knew what way to go about things. So instead of doing things the last minute, you realised that you needed to have things in advance. You could review them and you had to just talk about things before you did them. So I think there was just that whole, there was a lot more commercial awareness, but it was just quite funny the way we all had different rules on placement and we were able to like merge it together in Vania.
So Sophie, what do you know now about the kind of organisation and job role that you want? You talked a little bit about it that you think you'd be trying to secure after the graduation there.
So because of the nature of my role in being on a streaming service and, you know, also researching into our competitors and other like SVOD services, I would love to continue along that trajectory. I find it so interesting and I'm hoping and planning that I can write my dissertation on a similar topic because I did find it so interesting, and the opportunity to continue in that kind of sphere would be amazing. But I think, you know, if it just depends on, I suppose, what jobs are available at the time. It's a continually growing landscape, but I think, you know, sports tech as well is really interesting. There's a lot going on there at the minute, and anything that I can continue that, you know, trying to get better commercially is definitely going to be huge, I think, for any professional development.
I suppose it must be a great encouragement. I mean, I think I sent you the link over yesterday to the article that Maggie Jones at the CIM had just released about the impact of companies during COVID. And for some reason, I don't know why this has happened, but you know, I think there's 24,000 marketing jobs currently in the UK. That must be very encouraging for somebody who's going into their final year studies and thinking, okay, well, at least there's a big landscape of opportunity there for us.
Yeah, there is. It's huge, and I think there's, every time I have my LinkedIn job alerts on, and every time, you know, you go on to LinkedIn to have like a browse or a scroll, there's constantly more and more marketing jobs getting advertised, and that's just in Belfast alone, which is great to see, because I think previously, and was maybe why I applied for a placement that was in London, I wasn't as aware of the ones that Belfast had to offer. So seeing the roles start to grow here is incredible.
Okay, and I mean, talking about then the learnings that you had on your trying to join the dots up, I suppose, how have you taken what you've learned during your placement roles and are actively using it in the day-to-day job that you're currently doing?
I think because I got to do such a range of tasks, so when I was in Sync doing all of the writing stuff, I do a lot of that now. Content writing is a huge part of what I do now. And then when I was working in the agency, you were working across lots of different client accounts, and it's very much the same now for thinking of different, talking about different clients and different, needs of clients and different case studies and use cases, exactly the same process. And then also navigating, those different creative outlets, whether that's, I remember in agency, it was like, well, not all your customers are going to be on this platform. You had to understand that every customer had different, you're going to be a different way to reach them. It's exactly the same now. Like, it's very much like, certain, how to do certain comms and exploring different channels. So for me, it massively impacted where I am now. And I think having the range of roles meant that I was able to I knew exactly, as you said earlier, I knew where my strengths were, where my weaknesses were, and then it's just different when you graduate and go into a graduate role. It's completely different ball game then, because it's like, okay, this is it now.
Well, what's different about it? Tell me.
It's just different because it's, you know, you're going in and you're now, this is you, you've worked to get here.
Now you're proper grown up.
And it's, the role is exactly, the remit's bigger, and you know that you're thinking, I'm going to grow with this company, how am I going to grow with this company? And you know that you're thinking more with a long-term head on, like, what skills do I want to have? What skills do I need to get? And it's just different. I think age does it as well. When you go through that maturity stage of final year was massively hard compared to the second year that you left. Yeah. So there's a big gap. So the time you come into a graduate role, completely different to what you were before you started final year.
And I suppose with the growth of the tech sector, not just here in Belfast, but I mean everywhere, I suppose building up a solid base of experience in that sector, both at placement and now in your first role, must give you quite a lot of confidence going forward then, because you can always move sectors, but you know you're in a sector that's growing and there are going to be lots and lots of opportunities, and in the company you're in, I mean there's a lot of growth going on at the minute as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think as well it gives you that confidence that, you know, there'll be an opportunity for you to grow with the company, which is a really nice feeling to have. And also you see that the industry it's very innovative, you know, there's always new things coming out, but also, you know, being able to be in amongst that tech ecosystem in Belfast, which is better than ever before, it's hugely exciting. And you've become really passionate about what you're doing and the product that you're working with, and you just want to see it succeed, and that's a really nice feeling to have. But you get like that because you're in the graduate role and your head's in a different place and you're really excited to see what can come. So definitely, industry's been
whenever I graduated, marketing was fairly straightforward. You know, we didn't have much. We didn't have as many things to consider in terms of channels or technologies or analytics or all that stuff. Does that excite you, terrify you, a bit of both whenever you're going into the world of work, or is that what are your thoughts about, you know, what the options are available to you, and how you, I suppose going back to your point, Jamie, how you drill down and understand what's going to work for whatever company or organisation you're with?
I think it's definitely more exciting. I know, like, so many different and applying this to what, you know, I was working on last year. Like, you see, for example, BT Sport, like, they're bringing in hype mode features to their services, and, you know, just different things like that. I think it's really interesting to watch it all unfold, but then it's also being able to, you know, balance that with bringing in what you know about everything, but also what is relevant now and what I suppose like consumers or users want to make their experience best. So I think it definitely is. I think the positives at the minute are they maybe outweighing the negatives.
Okay. And do you think it focuses the attention a bit more on the primary job actually being understanding who your customers are? So because you've got such a broad choice about different channels, different technologies, different assets you can create, all that stuff, it's forced us to think a lot more actually about who it is we're targeting and what the right channel is, what the right asset is, what the right campaign type is, what the right products are. Like you said, adjusting the product types, because realising that, you know, if BT Sport want to continue having young people and students and young graduates subscribing to their channel, they've got to make content that is more, I mean, even Match of the Day do it, you know, they do, is it Match of the Day Extra? Which is all a bit more casual and relaxed, and they have the young hip hop artists and stuff on it, and it's you can see what they're doing. It's like, okay, the people who fall asleep on the sofa at 10:30 on a Saturday night watch Match of the Day, versus, you know, how do we make sure we've got a pipeline of a younger audience and younger viewers coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I think you can notice it even in things like pricing models and how people are doing it. Some people are, you know, some fans are only there for a season, and so they want to be able to chop and change, and having that choice when there's already so many, like, it's becoming a really saturated market, you know, when there's more of a flexibility in how you can pay for what services you're using. I think even that builds a great relationship with, like, your customer, and, you know, encouraging them, I suppose, to have that bit of brand trust as well.
I saw a line recently, and it's like about differentiation, but also being distinctive.
Yeah.
Then that is a completely different thing to being differentiated. Yeah, going back as well to, you know, marketing efforts, I suppose, you know, when it comes to writing and now you're thinking about, you know, what is the keyword we want to rank here for? That's going to be embedded the whole way throughout. You know, what way can we measure our SEO performance? You know, what tools can we use to do that? But also now it's like could be a new channel next month. You know, there's, you know, you might, you know, we especially into tactics, you know, looking at different verticals. And if a different vertical requires a different, you know, we need to reach them in a different way, what is it? We need to go and learn it, you know, and that's the thing. It's just been able to go, what is the business need right now? How can we reach the audience? And then going and learning that particular channel. And that's always changing. So in a way, we're kind of used to that. We're expecting that. We're expecting something new to come.
If you cast yourself forward a few years, you know, there's the age-old conversation now of, you know, marketing generalist or specialist. Where do you both see yourself? Do you want to choose your weapon, if you like, and go after something and be a technical expert in a particular discipline, or do you want to do the general marketing function role that has a little bit going on in a lot of different places?
I think the latter is definitely exciting, but I mean, for me, the perfect option would be a mixture of both, I suppose, because I think having something different each day is always exciting, and I suppose it depends on industry as well. You could go down that field of becoming, you know, like the expert, and I think to do that opens a lot of paths within that industry, and, you know, more opportunities for people coming through.
What about you, Jamie?
Yeah, like, well, the minute my focus is content and social media, so that would be my speciality at the moment, but I'm always keen to learn new skills. So I'd say like you, a mixture of both. I think that there's a need to, you know, right now the focus is on social media, but if that was to change and we were going to try a different tactic, I would work on that. So I think it just changes, and it depends on the role and what the business needs, but I think it's good to have a mixture of both.
Okay. And I suppose then to wrap up, say we have people who are watching this who are sitting in that position at the minute where they've been told, okay, go get yourself an internship replacement sorted for next year. What advice would you give them? What things that you would say they should start doing tomorrow that would start to lay the groundwork for that could take a lot of the pressure off and at least make them feel like there was some progress being made?
I think definitely starting early is key. So if you haven't started yet, just start now, and just start by brainstorming. It doesn't have to be anything complicated or like far-fetched. You can, you know, just jot down like a spider diagram of maybe what you want to start doing and go from there. I think get as many eyes on the material that you're going to be putting out there on the material as possible. I know I was going to the career services that you mentioned at the beginning, and I was reaching out to family members who were in totally different roles and just getting as many eyes as I could, because I wanted to see how it would look to different people, and then just having that confidence. I think you have to really push yourself forward, and you can't doubt yourself, because you won't apply for anything if you allow that kind of to override. But I think those are my main three. I'm not sure about you, Jamie.
Yeah, no, similar. I would say, especially on LinkedIn, I would look for, you know, individuals that are thought leaders in the marketing space. You know, who's doing really well in the marketing space. You know, what can I learn from what they're putting out? I would, you know, start blogging and sharing about, you know, your own ideas about certain campaigns, and also just joining meetup groups. And
it's great to see them coming back again, actually. I've noticed quite a lot of them, and I know you were a serial networker. I mean, we first met each other, I think, at one of these feature marketing events when they were in-person events, and I mean, I personally think that's a fantastic opportunity over the next while for people, because I mean, I'm signing up for everything at the minute. Just, you know, as soon as I hear there's an in-person marketing event happening, even if it's not a marketing event, to be honest, it's like, oh, I'm going to that, because there's going to be humans in a room again, and it's going to be amazing, and everyone's going to be so delighted to be there, that I think there's a massive opportunity there for people to get out and build their networks. And in a space, you know, people got a little bit tired, I think, maybe of business events. And the networking bit, I think, you know, you have to have something taken away from you before you realise actually how valuable it can be. So
totally.
Yeah.
I think that about covers us for today. Thanks very much, Jamie and
Thank
Sophie.
you.
Thank you.
For anybody who's still here, the next two, we've got two more sessions coming up. We have a sector focus for the arts on the 11th of November, and then at the end of November, I can't remember what that one is. I can't remember the exact date, but it's a focus on the PR and comms sector. So for the arts sector one, we have Michelle Baird from Ulster Orchestra and Rachel Leach from the Lyric Theatre joining us for that one. And then PR and comms, we have Catherine McCluskey, who is head of comms for the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, and Deborah King from King Communications and at our own agency down in Newry, who are going to be talking to us for that. So those events are on LinkedIn, so if you want to sign up for them, you can do so now. Thanks very much for joining us. Thank you again to Jamie and Sophie, and hopefully everybody found that useful, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Roasted.
Great, thank you very much.